This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
I'm not sure if that's a very good excuse, but you know. Okay, I had a look at the zones and overlays. Yeah.
Right, that's fine. I'm under control now.
I'll just get a... So what I've got here, I'll put this on the desktop, and if you want me to just...
It's really just the PowerPoint, mate.
Yeah, okay, no worries. I've got all this here anyway, and if you do feel that you need it, we can fire up this or Ostley or Planning Schemes or whatever you want. Can I just confirm, so we'll run through this first and then we'll do that process and agencies map?
Sorry?
The process and agencies map, or do you...
Let's just go through.
Let's stick with that. Yeah.
How long have I got?
Well, it's anything up to 2 hours, but to be frank, no one wants more lecture than less at this time. Yeah, how long do you want to take?
No, probably just take it out a bit.
About a bit of fun. Yeah, and then have no break, and then they can do the other stuff and go to the shoots. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Shoot starts in 2 hours.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So do what you feel is working.
2 hours is the maximum.
Don't do us all over. Not no slight on you, sir. You know what I mean? But you look tired. You've been working bloody hard all this evening. Yeah.
Right, I'll leave you to it.
Okay, guys, we might get started. So, I just wanted to put things in context a little bit right now. We're obviously in week 12. If you haven't noticed that, you might have some struggles getting everything done. I just wanted to describe the subject to you, not hopefully in a repetitive way, but in a sense to remind you what you've done as a precursor to for me telling you what the nature of the exam will be, and I'll offer some questions, but I don't want to hold things up too long because we're very lucky again to have Andrew Walker here, and he's going to take us through an exercise, and hopefully you've had a look at the instruction and started to think about what those different planning provisions might mean for a site. So we'll make a fair bit of time for him, and if we finish it a bit early, that will be good because we can get the other things done that we need doing, and we'll have the tutorials at the normal time. So what's kind of happened through this process of the semester, and as I say, I do this as a precursor for the nature of the exam, as a little reminder. Hopefully we've become quite familiar, hey Matt, we've become quite familiar with planning schemes, the VPPs, but their manifestation as City of Moreland, City of Yarra, etc. And while it would be somewhat ambitious to think that you would know everything about the planning scheme, that you would know the key components, how to read a zone, an overlay, a particular provision, etc. So if you haven't thought that through, that's quite an achievement in itself for a semester's work. And if you want to think about how to reinforce those things, you might want to go through the worksheets again, if there were, or maybe you haven't been through them all. I would strongly recommend doing that prior to the exam as a way of studying. You've become in some ways familiar with the key components of the Planning and Environment Act, and of course we've made a little bit of reference to others, but you don't need to bring them to the exam, just the Planning and Environment Act. You've had a look at Stephen Rowley's excellent new book, and you've been through some of the main agencies, but probably the most important thing to get out of this is the processes and how these processes are related to the Act and planning schemes, as well as a series of legal principles So we've been through, you know, the main players in the game. You can see here, and here I'm sort of inferring a good study schedule would mean that you felt a level of familiarity with these different components. We've thought about the context of metropolitan planning and perhaps knowing ways that the metropolitan plan in the Melbourne case links into the planning scheme, something that would be quite reasonable to expect if one were an examiner, say. Thinking about how planning actually is done in the implementation phase at a local government level. Think about these two key roles, the planning authority and the responsible authority, and all of the other processes that are invoked by those two main roles. And getting right down to brass tacks here in week 5 there, just how is an assessment undertaken? As well as just using the planning scheme in a very fundamental way, working your way through what are the zones and overlays or other provisions that might apply, what triggers a permit, what the decision criteria as a result. So these are fundamentals, and you will be expected to be pretty much right across those and to be thinking about other things on top of that in the exam questions. Again, the permitting process. Obviously, I didn't mention this just now, but the scheme amendment processes, how plans are made, both in the text and the map, but probably more commonly how they're changed over time or added to with extra overlays or different clauses, and how that relates to the VPPs. And then thinking about permit processes and indeed how one might get to VCAT. What are the processes that take you to VCAT? What happens in VCAT? What are the outputs of VCAT, or orders, determinations, and perhaps how that links into higher courts, the Supreme Court primarily, and indeed, as we've spent the last few weeks thinking about what are some of the main principles that are applied and how to read case law. And when I say how to read case law, how to derive key principles about case law or from case law, such as ancillary uses and existing use rights, natural justice, and so forth. And thinking about how you might be able to apply those in a circumstance that you haven't necessarily seen in exactly that form before. And in many ways, that's the definition of being a professional. A lawyer does it all the time, planners do it some of the time. It's dealing with and using intellect to deal with non-routine circumstances. So I don't know exactly what the answer is here, but I can work it out or work out the possible solutions. So this is why we don't just have robots doing it, even though sometimes as a stat planner I have felt a bit like a robot because there is a lot of routine in there. The real work is done in dealing with non-routine circumstances where there's a need to exercise professional discretion and consideration. So hopefully you are getting the sense of what that might be like and how you might do it. So we're building on some really fundamental skills in statutory planning, reading the maps, reading the planning scheme, thinking about triggers of permit, decision criteria, fitting together those very high-level policy considerations right down to what a zone says is allowed or not allowed, and so forth. So, so that's what we've been through. You've had assignment 1, which is tested out, and hopefully you've demonstrated with great ability that you can identify zones and you can make an assessment, you can consider context, and of course assignment 2, quite a challenging assignment, essentially acting in the role of a planning officer making an assessment as a really fantastic way to learn how to use a planning scheme in a very applied sense. Interestingly, a firm I previously worked for a number of years is SJB Planning, and they recently said, we would like to give you some money as an award. And you guys won't be able to apply for it, but to sort of demonstrate oh, you might be able to, depends how quick we move. Don't bind me to this. But anyway, one of the directors said, we want to reward and acknowledge excellent stat planning skills. And so they're going to fund over a number of years an award for the best student in planning law, stat planning and planning law. And indeed, I've had this conversation with many people over the years. As a background skill set, it's one of the most transferable and usable skill sets. It may not always be completely apparent, but this is where the rubber hits the road most of the time. So I will now leave that and talk for a few minutes about the exam. And very quickly, I hope you have found on the LMS the exam advice. I won't read through what you can read yourselves. It's 2 hours. You have to work out when and where it is, so it's not my fault. But that's not just me being funny, that's what the university requests. You work out the time and place, rather than me telling you and getting it wrong. Being prepared to do quite an applied bit of work in that 2 hours. When I say applied, we're going through from fairly routine things through to quite intellectual and critical views of what's good and bad about the planning system in the sense of the Act and the schemes. And typically, people who get a good mark are the ones who can understand the process, who can find, if they don't already know the relevant section of the Act, apply a principle in a circumstance that has been presented to you. And you don't have to be exactly right when we're asking for a principle to be applied, but rather you have to provide a strong case, a well-presented case with good principles, and we might say, wouldn't necessarily agree, but fair comment, that has validity, and we would give marks to that. But if it's a shot into the blue, obviously that doesn't get marks. So by maybe citing cases or principles, by using certain sections of the Act and so forth, that's what gives you the marks. But the exam also includes, so that's sort of section A, part A, 3 questions of 20% each, and you can see there's a fair bit of work to go through. So if you haven't practiced your handwriting very much lately, I certainly can't write anything like as fast as I could because we're all doing this, but it is a necessity of the exam. Maybe have a little practice run of writing stuff out because if we can't read it or you just get a cramp, it's a disadvantage, and we can't really change that. We can't get typing stuff in there. But the part B is what we've termed a reasoned answer. And we might pose to you questions about the nature of the planning scheme and the Act and the role of politics in it and the role of the planner, objectors, these sorts of things come out in that. So you definitely should bring the VCAT cases that we've referred to directly and are in the readings. I would recommend as an exam technique to read them really carefully and to get to know them and to make notes on relevant parts, or perhaps you might want to make some notes on another piece of paper. You can bring all that. We're not trying to test memory exactly, but the ability to use these things in different circumstances. Definitely bring the Act and bring a copy of the VPP table of contents with you. I have also included in the exam zones, overlays, particular and general provisions that are relevant to the questions I pose. This is to avoid the mass printing out of planning schemes, which I've been troubled with for a number of years. When it got over a foot high, You know, it seemed like that was the 30 centimetres. That seemed like the time to change how we're doing things. So that's the advice. Read it really carefully, and you probably also saw that I have given an example. And please note that I have changed a number of things in the exam. So if you get advice from others or whatever who've done things in previous years, be aware that the nature of the proportions and the style has changed a little bit. So you'll need to be ready based on this style. Not huge differences, but what I would hope is an improvement to let people spend more time on fewer questions to show your stuff, to show that you know what you're doing. So maybe take a couple of moments since it's sort of at the fore. Any questions about the exam right now you'd like to ask? Okay, that gives me a sense that maybe we're doing our job on this side of letting you know what's going on. I think we might throw it over to you, Andrew. And Andrew's very kindly offered to do that, offered to take us through an exercise, and I think it will exercise our minds. Thank you, sir. Just give me a yell if you want me to drive anything. Which bit are you after? Just the PowerPoint. Yeah, double click on the lecture. Oh, that's the PDF. Oh, it's the same anyway, isn't it? Yeah. Except we'll need to maximise it if we want to see the whole screen. Try that. It might be easier if you kill that one off and we use the actual PowerPoint. Sorry guys, this is my fault. I've failed to copy the one thing that Andrew needed. But I've got extra stuff. Flash drive.
While we're getting that sorted out, I understood that Alan put a sample question to you last week, or asked you to read it. It might help if you get that up on LMS or get a hard copy handy.
That one there, the Word document. I know that's a long way away, but okay, it is all yours, sir.
Okay, so what we're going to do is go through a hypothetical scenario, and I'm going to ask you some questions based on that hypothetical scenario. What's happened is that a consortium of developers have acquired a substantial portion of land in Brunswick, just off Sydney Road. So if you know Berkeley Square, this is just to the north of Berkeley Square. Berkeley Square's on the south side of Western Street. So you can see there are a number of individual land titles. We have 146 to 154 Sydney Road, 1 to 27 Western Street, these titles on the south side of Western Street, 12 to 26 Edward Street, south side of Edward Street, and 1 to 15 Charles Street. These small plots in the north eastern corner of the site. So a large site, one landowner in a excellent location. So what are the zonings? Well, there are 3 zone controls that apply to this parcel of land. For the small properties in Charles Street, the land is within the neighbourhood residential zone. Most of the land is in the industrial 3 zone. And then we have a small portion of land with frontages onto Sydney Road in the commercial 1 zone. There are some other controls that apply to the site. You can see my high-tech maps here. Heritage overlay controls apply to the properties fronting Sydney Road, and also to the properties fronting Charles Street. What else do we have? There's a blown up version of the zoning controls in colour this time. So you can see the industrial 3 zone applies to most of the site. Then the neighbourhood residential zone 1, Charles Street. Also you can see, when you're looking at a site, it's also important to look at the zones around. What are at the interfaces? So we have the neighbourhood residential zone primarily to the northeast, commercial 1 zone to the south, and also to the west. A close-up again of the heritage overlay controls. Again, when you're looking at the particular heritage overlay controls, in both cases it's not an individual heritage control, but the site is within a larger heritage precinct. So we have the HO 73 precinct to the west, and we're just on the edge, you can see, the eastern edge of the HO 73 precinct. And then you can see the HO 149 precinct, which is the Sydney Road precinct, which basically applies to the length of, well, not the whole length, but a considerable portion of Sydney Road. Another control, the Design and Development Overlay 18, applies to part of the site. So you can see it applies to the small fine-grained lots that front onto Sydney Road, but it doesn't apply to the rear part of the site. Now, what I'm going to do now is just go through a series of photographs so you can get an idea of the lay of the land. Always do a site inspection. So here we have the Brunswick Hotel, which is a live music venue. And we look basically on the corner of Western Street and Sydney Road, looking northeast. So you can see the shop frontages along Sydney Road, and they're all subject to the Sydney Road Heritage Overlay. Generally fine-grained, 2-storey Victorian Edwardian shop fronts you see throughout many retail strips in Melbourne. So this is quite a common scenario in Melbourne. We're just moving slightly to the, panning the view slightly to the northeast, still Sydney Road. You can see the Gladhome site there. This was taken last year. I actually haven't gone back and seen if the development's been constructed. Has anyone gone back or had a look at the site recently? No? Anyway, there was a permit issued for a 6-storey development behind that building. And you can see there's some beautifully crafted apartments on sale. Register your interest today. Selling fast, you might have missed out. Now what I'm going to do is So you've been along Sydney Road, you've seen the development site, which has had a 6-storey apartment building proposed or approved. Now we're moving along Western Street. So this is the land in the Industrial 3 zone. So you can see, what's the phrase? An undistinguished building. A building without distinction in Western Street. The sort of site that makes developers salivate at the mouth. No heritage constraints on that site. Moving along, again another nondescript warehouse building on the north side of Western Street. Again, moving the view line slightly to the north east. You again see some fairly nondescript is the word I was looking for, nondescript warehouse buildings on Western Street. Again, panning around, you can see the Charles Weston Hotel, yellow building that's in the heritage overlay. But generally you can see that the north side of Western Street is a pretty nondescript collection of unremarkable buildings. Again, another shot of Western Street. Here's the laneway. So you may recall, if we go back to the site plan, it's not shown on that one, there is a laneway in between land in the Industrial 3 zone and land in the Commercial 1 zone. So McDougall Street extends further to the north, and there's a little laneway that connects up to Edward Street. That's land owned by the council. Oops. It's the laneway. Now we're in Edward Street, and it's a bit like Western Street. A collection of nondescript warehouse, factory, former industrial buildings. So far as the uses are concerned, you can see there's a couple of cafes, warehouse uses, retail, a dwelling you can see on that site. Moving along, again, Edward Street, a similar story. A long-range view there. Some interesting graffiti, probably a vacant site. More nondescript buildings. So rug wash, light industrial type use. You get the idea. An industrial building, again nondescript, no heritage values. Various views of the street there, Edward Street. All right, now we're moving to Charles Street. This is the land in the neighbourhood residential zone. Fine-grained workers' cottages, single storey within a heritage overlay. So there are obviously some constraints to the development of these parcels of land. Then we have the Charles Weston Hotel on the corner there, again within the heritage overlay. All right. Get the idea? So, we go back to the site. The development consortium wants to demolish the buildings at the rear of the Sydney Road properties and construct a 5-storey apartment building with, at the rear of the site, and keep the shop fronts facing Sydney Road. wants to demolish all of the buildings in Western Street and Edward Street, including the Charles Weston Hotel and the dwellings in Charles Street, and wants to construct a mixed-use development with ground floor activation, so retail, cafe, outdoor dining spaces on the Western Street frontage, an Aldi supermarket. I don't think there's an Aldi at Berkeley Square at the moment, so Aldi wants to move in. 2,000 square metres of floor space and 10 specialty shops. So they're the smaller shops you'd find associated with a supermarket. Underground car parking facilities with 3.5 basement levels accessed from Western Street. And a 4 to 12 storey building. So 12-storey maximum with fantastic views over Berkeley Square into the CBD, Royal Park, Princes Park, and there's also a transition in building height. So we have 12 storeys in this portion of the site, transition down to 4 storeys at the Charles Street interface. Now, got all that? Over to you. The developer wants some advice about the development potential of the site and any problems the developer might have based on the fact scenario that I've just put to you. If we're doing an analysis of development potential, what's the first thing we might do? Just as a general idea. I'll give you a clue. We look at the opportunities and the constraints of the site. What are the factors that say this is a development site? We can get 12 storeys on this site. And what are the factors which might prevent that outcome? So what I'm going to do is go through an opportunities and constraints analysis for this site. And being an optimist, let's start off with the opportunities. Or maybe I'm being a pessimist if you're not favourable to development. What are the opportunities for this site? What's something that's telling us it's a site that can be developed? Come on. Don't know the answer after...
Should I capture the pearls of wisdom as they come to us, Andrew?
Oh, sure.
I don't like using chalk, but I can push myself.
Who said that? Yep. There you go, sir. Okay. I'm bribing for answers. Commercial 1 zone, good start. What else? Yep. Yep. Good answer. Catch. What else? Sorry? Supermarket in an industrial zone. But that's not quite correct. We'll come back to that. There's a problem with that. What else? Yeah, we've got a large site. We've got one landowner. We've got a large site, so we can massage development to deal with the constraints. So, for example, if it was a small site, there's no way we could contemplate getting 12 storeys on the site. Because it's a large site owned by one developer, we can massage things so that the 12 storeys are located in a location where it doesn't have any impact. Yep. Yep. Catch. Yeah, so it's in a, what does the State Planning Policy Framework and MSS say about where you maximise development on transport corridors? What else? In terms of similar site factor related to the same point, yes? Yeah, spot on. So if you read the MSS, always read the MSS. The MSS identifies activity centres and it directs the highest density development in and around activity centres where there is access not just to good transport, but also to other services and facilities that are required on a daily basis. So we've got the supermarket just across the road, Medicare, municipal services, all sorts of stuff. You don't need to drive a car. You can basically get all your needs by walking around. So the scheme also identifies the Brunswick Activity Centre as one of the highest order activity centres in the Moreland area. So far as Moreland goes, this is where the highest form of density is expected and supported under the MSS. I think you've actually covered most of them. Anything else?
Activation of the street where it's currently desolate with industrial, so it will have shops down the bottom and that will make it safer.
Yeah. I think you could sell this, sorry. Try another one?
Sign any waiver.
Okay. Oh, what's it? Certainly I think the council would be, if you came to the council and said, look, it's currently a degraded industrial area, not much going on, we're going to activate the street, they'd look on it favourably. So that's certainly an opportunity, yes.
Solar access to the south is a car park and a supermarket, so really any height you build doesn't actually create an overshadowing issue.
Yep. That's another way of saying it doesn't have particularly sensitive interfaces. So this is not a sensitive interface. Normally if you've got a site to the south, you have to consider the overshadowing impacts, particularly if it's residential. But here we're just overshadowing a car park, no problem. Although it's a development opportunity. So no, there is a principle of equitable development. So you would have to take that into account to some extent.
Existing building stock, it's built form,
Yep.
it's fairly low quality.
Low quality,
Opportunity for improvement on
Yep.
the site. I think.
Yeah. That's what the lady up there was saying.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't write it down.
Activating the street.
I've so long got along too.
All right. Well, I think you've covered it all. There's one other aspect. What are council's yep.
I was going to say the one further north that just already been approved.
Yep, sets a bit of context. Sorry. Yeah, it does set context. A good thing to do if you're doing opportunities and constraint analysis is just do a search for VCAT cases or other approvals. The fact that a 6-storey development has been approved on the site to the north, our site is similar in area, so there's no reason we couldn't get 6 storeys as well at the back. There's one other important factor here. No, it's a bit tricky. There are no height controls currently on the site, at least for the industrial 1-3 land. Okay? Often when you have a development site, there's a design and development overlay in place, which puts in height controls. Central portion of this site, no height controls. So 12 stories, why not 16 stories? Okay. So they are the opportunities for the site. It's a great development site. That's a fair stack of things that are very positive factors in support of a high-rise development on the site. Now, what are the negatives? What are the constraints? Yep.
I'm not entirely sure that I think there are different zones that would require consolidation.
Different zones, they require consolidation. So I've got to repeat the answers. Yeah, there are problems with the zones. Right? In particular, we'll come back to it later on.
By removing industrial, you're actually removing potential employment prospects in the area where a place just one supermarket is in.
There might be more jobs in supermarkets.
Yeah, but you can't get that, can you? So it's actually taking out industrial land
Yeah.
across the city that will be used for as employment.
It may not be a problem. I suppose it depends whether the council has an industrial land use strategy.
I think that is.
Yeah, they do. And it may identify that this land is crucial as part of the industrial land supply. If so, there might be problems using it for other purposes. But on its face, it doesn't look like it's not in a great location for industrial. You know, it's got residential interface to the east. It's in the activity centre. Having it developed at 1 and 2 stories is an underdevelopment of the land in its location. What are the constraints? Yep.
It actually does not align with the normal industrial land use strategy.
It doesn't. Okay. Wow. There you go.
I think it's category 1.
Okay. So it's a candidate for some other use apart from industry.
No, it's industry like commercial conditions and
Okay. Yep.
From memory, Western Townsend some years ago wrote a strategy,
Yes.
and I'm pretty sure it's the same one, identifying that there may be a cause, even though it's highly underutilised, to try and maintain.
Yeah.
Different council, so
Yeah.
years ago.
It's it's interesting. I'm doing a case for in Cremorne, in Richmond, for the new SEEK headquarters, and the council has its former industrial land. The council rezoned it to business. Lots of pressure on the council to rezone it for residential use. Council said no. We want to encourage businesses in this area, and now it's starting to pay off. So there is a constant press for residential zoned land. So the council may be resistant if there are other better uses for the land. Would you like a, I'm not sure if I can... Watch out. Pretty close. What other constraints? What other constraints do we have? Yeah, you probably don't want another one. Yep, heritage is a big constraint for this site. So I've got 2 heritage constraints, front portion and at Charles Street. Yes, that's what I want to do.
They don't let knock down the SARS on Sydney Road.
Correct.
Incorporate those things.
Yep. Yeah, so the proposal is to keep the facades on Sydney Road, demolish stuff that we showed the question over here. Yeah, so the local policy seeks to protect live music venues. We have a live music venue on the corner here. That's a constraint for the development of the site. Why is that? Yeah, reverse amenity. So recently, I don't know if you know the Tote Hotel in Collingwood. It's a constant problem. Have residents moving next to live music venues complaining about the noise, pressure on the live music venue to shut down, reduce noise. So the state government introduced a particular provision in the planning scheme specifically dealing with live music venues. Can you tell me what clause that is? No. No, it's clause, I think it's 52.43 from memory. Yeah. Oh, no. Thank you for that, but I threw it in there for the purposes of making the question a bit more complex. Yeah, so I'm stretching the truth a bit here. What other constraints are there? Oh, sorry, let's just go back to heritage. We're seeking, can you get a permit to demolish? Let's disregard the buildings that belong on Sydney Road. Let's just consider these buildings along the Charles Street. Can you get a permit to demolish the heritage buildings? Sorry? Yes? Who said yes? Yep, you can get a permit to, sorry, getting worse as time goes on. You can get a permit to demolish a heritage building. In terms of it, so there's a discretion to be exercised. Where might you look in the planning scheme to work out whether a permit may or may not be granted? Where do you start? What's the control? Heritage overlay. Start with the heritage overlay. Where else might you look? Yeah? Yes? Yeah, correct. I should be able to get this one. So, there are a couple of things we look at. Almost, I won't say every council, but most councils will have a local planning policy dealing with heritage. So Moreland has a heritage policy at clause 22.06, and it gives some guidance as to when a permit can be issued to demolish all or part of a heritage building. So it says, it is policy to discourage the total demolition of a heritage building. So from that, we know that there is a general policy directed at discouraging the removal of all of a heritage building, unless the building is structurally unsound, not the case here, and any proposed replacement building makes a positive contribution to the heritage significance of the heritage place. Now, yep.
Possibly argue to remove the houses because there's more of those around.
Yeah.
But the hotel in the corner is
Harder ask.
harder ask because it's like pretty much unique.
Yeah, well, what you need to do is you need to look at the, go a bit further and have a look at the statements of significance for the particular precincts. And unfortunately, when you go to the statement of significance, it says that all of these buildings along Charles Street are significant for the purposes of the heritage precinct. So, for example, if this precinct statement said the buildings are not contributory, they're not part of the heritage fabric of the precinct, then you would have a decent case for removing them. Now, what the policy also goes on to say is support partial demolition of a heritage place if the fabric proposed to be removed does not contribute to the heritage significance of the place. So that's why there is a reasonable case for saying we can demolish the rear portion of these buildings. Because so far as the heritage significance is concerned, the Sydney Road precinct, it's primarily the facades of the building, or the buildings, and how they present to Sydney Road. And again, we might be able to develop behind the hotel on the corner if we kept the facade, a three-dimensional piece of that building. All right, heritage, other constraints.
If they're 12 stories and not stepped back, then it could contribute to overshadowing and maybe even future wind pumps and
Yep. Overshadowing of the public realm, visual bulk. So yes, you wouldn't expect to have 12 stories right on the street. Would need to be set back. You've already had one, so I'm not giving you another one. What else? Yeah, we're going to have to work with the council because they are not big roads. The local council, Auckland City Council, to deal with access. Probably not a huge constraint, but it's something we're going to have to manage. Is the laneway capable of giving us that access? Maybe. Probably prefer to have access via the laneway than via Western Street because you generally want to have vehicle access tucked away via a laneway rather than on an active street. Any other constraints? I'll give you a bit of a hint here. Hint? What did I say at the start? Look at the zones around the site. Yeah. Yep. Another one? No. Yeah, so that's a big constraint here. It's having an interface with the neighbourhood residential zone, which is primarily 1 to 2 stories. Scale transition to 4 stories. It's an interface that's sensitive and that we have to manage. What else? Give you another hint. Can you hear up the back there? Is that all right? What else have we got? What other constraints? Yeah. What does it say? Yeah, it has a height control. So it only applies to part of the site, but who's the other person? Oh, no way. I did pick the biggest lecture theatre at the university to do this. All right, so it's not a 10-storey control, but it's a 19-metre preferred height control. 19-metre preferred height control, is that mandatory or discretionary? Discretionary, yeah. So we can get a permit to exceed that control. 19 metres, how many stories is that? Residential stories. About 3 metres, a bit more. 3 metres per storey, about 6 storeys. So we're proposing 5 storeys at the front portion, so should be fine. But it is a constraint we need to respond to. There are also, in the DDO, discretionary setback controls. That's something we also need to respond to. Now, we've been focusing on the development of the site in built form. What else do we need to think about? Use. You had one, sir? Sorry? Sorry. Sorry, go. So, the uses. Commercial 1 zone. Any problem? For supermarket dwellings, any problem in the commercial 1 zone? No? Don't need to deal with that. Industrial 3 zone. Any problem? Yes. Big problem. What's prohibited in the industrial zone, industrial 3 zone that we want to do? Accommodation. Yeah, so we can't get a residential building. What else is prohibited? Supermarkets prohibited, yeah. So we're over the 1800, I think it is, square metre control. So our Aldi supermarket can't go ahead in the industrial 3 zone. Yep. Sorry? Yes, it's subject to control. You look at S&P under 1800 square metres. So have to meet the condition we're proposing 2,000 square metres. Changes yeah, net leasable floor area must not exceed 1800 square metres. We're proposing 2,000 square metres. So it's a little trick question there for you. Glad I taught you that. Right, so we could put a 1,500 square metre Aldi in there and we'd be fine. Yep.
It says shops that have to join the supermarket, or wait, must join be on the same block as the supermarket.
And that might be a problem as well. Yep. That's more a commercial issue. The planning scheme doesn't try and pick. The planning scheme doesn't try and pick winners and losers. So if you go to a plan to VCAT and say, well, I oppose this apartment development because there are plenty of other apartments around that's noticed that by apartments therefore there's no economic need or benefit in this proposal. Not a relevant consideration. Okay, the planning system doesn't look at the economics of a proposal. Other problems. What else? What do we want to do on, sorry? Yeah, could be a problem. But we're still dealing with use and zoning. Or not use, development. What's the other zone we have? Neighbourhood res. Is there a height limit under the neighbourhood res? Yeah, we can't get 4 storeys on the neighbourhood residential zone land. There's a maximum height control. All right, so we've got problems with the zoning. What do we do? Sorry? Yeah, let's go for a rezoning. Might not need to worry about the commercial 1 zone, but certainly the industrial 3 zone and the neighbourhood residential zone, we need to have it rezoned. That's what I'm going to ask you. What do you think is the best zoning for this site? Maybe, yeah, it's a possibility. What are we really proposing to do though? What's probably, yeah, and a supermarket. So what springs to mind? Yeah, spot on. Who said mixed use? Well, not you up the back again. Should have seen him in his cricket days. Sorry about that. I don't think I'll try that again. It's too far. I give up, that's too far. Yeah, so mixed use zone. Mixed use zone. So what do we do if we want to get it rezoned? What are the options? Where do I go? Sorry? Yeah, who do I apply to with the amendment? Yep, planning authority. Is there another option? Minister, yeah. I'm mates with Richard Wynne. Knock on his door and say, look, can you rezone it? Is there a process whereby the minister can fast track it for me? Yes? There is. What section of the Act? This is a favourite exam question, by the way. What section of the Act? 20, subsection 4, yeah. So there is a process whereby the minister can fast track an amendment without going through the normal advertising, planning panels Victoria, submissions and hearing process. I've had it happen to me on a reverse basis where I've been acting for developers and then solicited for a VCAT hearing, and then 2 days before the VCAT hearing, the minister has used section 20, subsection 4 to approve a planning scheme amendment prohibiting the development. It's not that uncommon. Yeah, I'm actually running that one. So what happened in that case was there was a development in Collingwood, the Collingwood Arts Precinct site, and we have a bit of shh, please. It's a bit hard talking when other people are talking. So it was the development site in Collingwood, the Collingwood Arts Precinct. The developer, Tim Gurner, had a 12-storey proposal listed for a week-long hearing. Collingwood Arts Precinct didn't like it. Yarra City Council didn't like it. Hearing was starting on the Monday. We get a letter on the Thursday saying the minister is going to amend the planning scheme. And on the Friday, the minister amended the planning scheme to put in a mandatory height control of 8 storeys. So it's happened several times during this minister's and the previous minister's reign, and then we're obviously taking the minister to the Supreme Court. All right.
What were the reasons of stating significance that the minister submitted for that?
The Collingwood Arts Precinct is a arts precinct of state significance, according to the minister. We're actually challenging it on other grounds, but I won't let any trade secrets out in the public domain. Right, so we need a planning scheme amendment. So what do we need to do? We've talked about new zone control. We might also look to changes to the local planning policy framework to acknowledge the strategic importance of the site. What's the risk for us so far as the Moreland City Council is concerned in considering our rezoning request? What do councils like doing when it comes to control? Yes. So there is a risk that the council may seek mandatory or discretionary height controls for the site. So that's something as a developer that we would have to resist. Who might be a bit upset about this development, do you think? And who are our potential objector parties, do you think?
Residents in the surrounding area?
Yeah, probably the main ones, particularly in a neighbourhood residential zone. I'd say they're probably the main objectors. Anyone else? We've got an Aldi supermarket next to Berkeley Square. Anyone else you think might be goals? Yeah. So the owner of the Berkeley Square development is also another potential objector. Who else do we need to consult with in this process? Council. We might try consulting with objectors and the owner of Berkeley Square to try and get them on side. Who else? Referral authorities, yeah. So, worth talking to the council. We don't need to talk to Vic Roads because I don't think we're going to get access from Vic Roads Road. We're not going to get access from Sydney Road, no chance we're going to try for that. But yeah, if you are undertaking a proposal which involves a referral authority, talk to them, get them involved at an early stage.
Can I just ask a question? If the owner of Coles, his main motive would be economic development or objection, so would the regulatory, would the RA actually consider his objection, or would he?
Very good question. I'm not going to try and throw it up there. They would, yeah. The build form is a problem. But you are right. A purely commercial objection is not a valid basis to lodge an objection unless, for example, the scheme identified Berkeley Square as the primary activity centre in Moreland. The establishment of the Aldi would compromise the economic operation of the Berkeley Square Centre, and that outcome is inconsistent with the objectives of the planning scheme. But that's a very long bow to draw. That's the only basis on which a commercial objection can succeed. Sorry? It's more because it might be that Aldi is so successful that all the other businesses fail, right? So, for example, the planning scheme might say, we want this to be we want the Berkeley Square Centre to be the hub of economic activity in Moreland, and we also want the Sydney Road shops to be successful and vibrant. So that's a planning scheme policy. If those landowners can prove that if Aldi establishes, it will suck the life out of Berkeley Square and the other shops so that they're not economically viable, then that's an outcome that is inconsistent with the planning scheme. Okay. Yeah, like Yes. So it's a very difficult argument to win. I don't want to suggest it's otherwise, but that's the only circumstance in which an economic argument could have any prospect of success, and even then, the prospects are very, very low. So you dress it up as some other objection. Built form. The other good objection for the... What else might be a good objection for the Berkeley Square people to run? Traffic, yep. Sorry? Neighbourhood character, yep. I don't think you haven't had any yet, have you? Neighbourhood character. What else? I mentioned it before. No? What's this side? What is it? It's a car park. But what might be in the future? It's a development opportunity. We might be able to argue that this concept of equitable development, if you build 12 stories right on the boundary, we're overshadowing our potential redevelopment site and constraining the development potential of our site. An equitable development argument. And that's, along with internal amenity, they're sort of the two hot topics in planning, equitable development and internal amenity.
Only owner of that site could object though.
Yes. Oh, the council might also run the argument as well as the responsive planning authority, but I don't think the people in the residential areas to the east run that argument. All right. Let's make some assumptions. Let's assume the council supports the amendment, okay? But it wants to have a 10-storey mandatory height control on the site. So we can't have it 12 stories. It says mandatory 10 stories. And also a 2-storey mandatory height limit on the neighbourhood residential land. The panel, there are objections lodged. Panel, however, fails to give notice, or there's notice isn't given to adjoining landowners. What happens then? So there's a procedural defect. The adjoining landowners haven't been given notice. Yeah, correct. What section? (39). So, if you had one? So, 39, section 39 of the VCAT Act, procedural defect in an amendment process. After VCAT, you can challenge it. Let's assume that's fixed up. The panel recommends a discretionary 10-storey height limit. So it goes back to the council for adoption. What can the council do? Is it bound to follow the panel's recommendation? Yeah, it's not bound to follow the panel's recommendation. Panel is just an advisory body. It's making recommendations. So the council is perfectly entitled to say, heard what the panel said, but we're going to adopt the amendment with the 10-storey mandatory height control. Let's assume that's what it does. Okay, so the council's gone through the amendment process, council's happy, but adopts it with a 10-storey mandatory height control and also a 2-storey mandatory height control for the neighbourhood residential land. What happens then? Is that it? It's in the scheme, bad luck. scrunchies on offer. Come on. Come on. What happens? Can the council approve it? Very quiet over here. Council approve it? Yes? No? Who says yes? No one says yes. Who says no? No one says no. Come on. No, that's a plating permit. We're talking about a planning scheme amendment here. Who has the most power in the planning system? The Minister. The Minister has to approve the amendment. Okay, so it goes off to the Minister. Does the Minister have to follow the Council's recommendation or the Council's position? No. Does the Minister have to follow the panel's recommendation? No, the Minister can do what he or she likes, okay? Yes, lobster, for example. All right, let's say that the Minister approves the amendment, zones it all mixed-use zone with a discretionary 10-storey height control. And that might be the time for a break. Yeah? So we'll come back after the break. We'll go through a quick permit application process now that the land's been rezoned. Hello. Hi. You're after me? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's just
students will be doing
Sure.
that. So I'll make a note. They'll be here after we finish.
Yeah.
Yeah, so after the lecture finishes, they'll come in. Yeah, it's the students. Not me. So, yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, great. No worries.
Yeah. So yeah. So we're trying to challenge that process. Also, we're saying your decision is invalid. So we're saying what you did had no force or effect. Yeah. He does have the power, yes, and yeah. Yes, under 20 subsection 4. But we're saying that he didn't exercise that, did not exercise that power properly. If you don't exercise the power properly, then the exercise of the power has no force or effect. That's what we're arguing. That's right, yes. That's what we're saying. It's quite a complicated argument, which I can't really explain without a sort of 20-minute discussion. The wrong information, you could say, yeah. We say that basically the power has to be exercised for the good of planning in Victoria, right? And applying the net community benefit test. And we say that he applied another test. He didn't, which is wrong. Yeah, which is not the right test.
Because it's not
he didn't apply the net community benefit test properly. Very well. That's what we're saying. We're also saying that he considered, what he said was, I'm considering the benefits and disbenefits of exercising his power. And he listed the benefits. He didn't list the disbenefit being the impact on my client. So we say, well, you didn't, all the relevant facts. Okay. So it's quite complicated, but that's... Sorry, just reading another...
Planning.
Quite dangerous from there, isn't it?
Occasionally I think, am I going to get in trouble for this? And I think, how safe can you be?
Society do we live in?
Yeah, I know, it's weird, isn't it? Yeah. It's funny though, I mean, I do this bushfire stuff and we're out on site and, you go through this potential limbs dropping off trees and people slipping down a massive slope and that, and I do it all, but then when we get there I say, just do things carefully and, think, particularly masters. So, yes, that's right, yeah. It's going well, but yeah, maybe just push through.
Might get going. All right, we'll go through this quickly. We're now at the stage where we've got the planning scheme amendment and we want to apply for a planning permit. We lodge a planning permit application with the Moreland City Council. After taking advice, decided that 5 stories in Sydney Road is a little bit light on, so we're going for 7 stories. 1 story above the discretionary height control. And we've decided to apply for 3 to 4 stories along Charles Street. Do we have to give notice of the application? Yep. Who to? Yep, neighbours. Who else? Anyone who might suffer material detriment. Right, so in this instance you can imagine it will be a fairly wide notice given to everybody. Council, you're the planning officer at the council. You get a wad of information. You decide that, how long have you got to decide the application? 60 days, yep. Decide you need more time, what might you do? Request further information, good. What section? Right, that was a bit mean. Now, your you're a objector. What grounds might you think of running in opposing this application? What are the issues here? Overlooking, yep. Yep. Traffic, yep. Overshadowing, yep. Overshadowing traffic, noble character, writing these down.
The more senior of the barristers expects service.
Yeah. Yeah, next to the live music venue, yep. What else? Missing big one. What are the controls that apply to the site? Heritage overlay, so we've got heritage issues. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. But yeah, if you're running, probably not. Oh, I think you've probably got the nub of it there. Height. You might also say, well, look, the discretionary height controls are 10 stories. You're applying for, 19 metres. You're applying for round about, let's say 20 metres or so with your 6 stories. But more importantly, for the balance of the site, you're applying for 12 stories. Discretionary height control of 10 stories. So there's an argument about the overall height and whether it's inconsistent with the strategic aspirations of the site as expressed through the design and development overlay that applies. All right. So the council then makes a decision. It decides that the heritage overlay applies to the Charles Street buildings and the pub on the corner, so it refuses to grant a permit for the demolition of those buildings. Otherwise, imposes conditions requiring those heritage buildings to be retained and also requiring a reduction in the height so that it's reduced to accord with the design and development overlay. So after council makes its decision, what does it do? What's the process? There are objections. Objections been lodged, so objections. What's the next thing the council does? Decide, notice of decision. Yeah. So it issues a notice of decision to grant a permit. Now, the Charles Residents Association for Preservation are formed. They're formed after the council issued the notice of decision, so they didn't object, but they want to appeal the council's decision to issue the notice of decision. Can they do so? Yes. What do they have to do? No. You can lodge an appeal with VCAT even if you don't object, but you have to get leave of VCAT to be joined as a party. But if you want to object, sorry, you may recall last time I said just put in an objection, okay? So even if you're not necessarily opposed to a development, put in an objection so that you can appeal to VCAT if necessary. So the Charles Residents Association for Preservation, the CRAP, lodges an appeal against the council's decision. The developer is also not happy with the conditions in the notice of decision. What can the developer do? Is the developer stuck with the permit conditions? Yeah, so they can appeal to VCAT against the conditions in the notice of decision. All right, let's put the developer hat back on. We're preparing for VCAT. What sort of evidence do you think we'll need? So you've heard what the objections are. What do you think? What sort of evidence? Sorry? Expert evidence, yes. That's, what sort of expert evidence? Come on. I need to get rid of these. Traffic, yep. Traffic? Sorry? Heritage, yep. Oh, sorry. Heritage, traffic, what else? Daylight modelling, yeah, good idea. It's not up there. No, don't worry about waste management, that's part of traffic. Sorry? Urban, who said that? Yeah, urban design, urban context. Acoustics, yep, for the live music venue. You're okay? Urban design. What else? Traffic, yep. What about you guys? Town planner. Town planner. So that would probably do it. Planning, number one. Urban design. Traffic, heritage, acoustic. Maybe economic, if the Berkeley Square keeps on objecting. Yeah, not a bad idea. Get Mr. Patrick in to describe the landscape proposal. Probably a good idea. Yep.
They're afraid.
All right. Now, so you get the expert team on board. The town planner expresses concerns after consulting with the daylight modeller about the internal amenity of the apartments proposed and the impacts. On what basis would the town planner be making that decision? Sorry? Res code, yep. Res code, what was the other one? Yeah. Yeah. You've got me actually. I think it's 52.58, clause 58, yep. Well done. Would you like one of these? So clause, oh, good catch. So, based on clause 58, res code, if it's under for the parts under under 5 stories. Does Moreland have a local planning policy about high-rise development? Yes, so you look at that, okay. So basically what you've got to do is look at the scheme, what are the relevant controls, how does the proposal respond to those controls. All right, so the town planner says need to make some changes. Can we do that as part of the VCAT process? Yes, we put in amended plans as part of the VCAT process 6 weeks before the hearing. So you can see you need to get your experts involved as early as possible, because if they recommend changes, you need to have time to make the changes 6 weeks before the hearing. Is there another option? Get another expert. But look, generally you pick the person who is going to give robust, independent advice. You pick the best expert you can, and if they're telling you you need to make changes, generally you do need to make those changes. There are some experts who are known for being a bit more flexible than others, but I'm sure that their evidence carries less weight. So developers will always push you for need more yield. I don't want to make those changes, but generally if you've got a reputable expert, it necessitates making some changes. All right, we're nearly at the end of the process. We run the VCAT case. The VCAT directs the issue of a permit. The reasons conclude that the objections of the commercial competitor are irrelevant. It upholds the council's condition on the basis that the height controls should be applied as though they were mandatory. And notwithstanding it finds the hotel building has no heritage significance in its own right, requires the retention of the hotel building in order to preserve a more pleasant building form on Western Street. It emerges that one of the VCAT members lives in the area and is a member of the CRAP, but did not disclose that during the course of the hearing. What do you think? Are there potential bases on which to challenge the VCAT decision? Sorry, didn't disclose, yep. Bias, is that bias? Yes, pretty strong case of bias. Where do you go to challenge? Go back to VCAT? Yeah, Supreme Court. So it's an error of law. An error of law is one of the few instances where you can go to the Supreme Court to challenge a decision of VCAT. Can you challenge the merits of the decision at the Supreme Court? Challenge the merits? What was that? No, correct. You can only appeal to the Supreme Court on the basis of an error of law. Okay? Are there any other potential avenues to appeal to the Supreme Court from the fact scenario I've read out to you? Bias is one. Do you think applying a discretionary control as if it's mandatory sounds a bit dodgy? Yes? It's potentially an error of law. The tribunal should apply the control as a discretionary control, not as if it imposes some sort of mandatory height control. Otherwise, there might be a dispute about the decision on the heritage aspect in that the purpose of the heritage control is to protect heritage values, not to preserve the overall streetscape. So, hopefully that's helpful. We've workshopped an example. We've gone through most of the processes in the Planning and Environment Act. So, if you know the answers to the questions I've been asking during the course of the lecture, you'll hopefully do well in the exam. Thank you.
Fantastic to go through all that. Hopefully it triggered some, oh my God, I don't know, I should know, or yes, I'm on top of it. But I think more than that, Andrew's example takes us through a fairly typical set of questions. The substance of the case and the location could be different, but that way of thinking through, digging through to what the relevant controls are and what they mean on a piece of land, but also understanding its context is a fundamental skill that you will use again and again. So thank you very much, Andrew. Normally I'll present a bottle of wine, but I forgot it in the mad scramble to get here. So I'll provide that to you at another time. I would just also like to thank you for your support for the subject. It's not just this year, but on an ongoing basis. It's really much appreciated, Andrew. And I think I might combine your lolly throwing with the selection of the netball squad in future years, because I've seen some pretty amazing catching skills out there. We could take advantage of it. So thanks again, Andrew, and thank you guys. Okay, that's good timing. They can go to the chute and go from there. Sorry, I had the bottle of wine sitting there. It's a university issue. I can't claim for its qualities, but I'm sure there's
University House would be right.
Yeah, probably would be. Well, no, I think my PA just gets, a box of whatever the budget allows.
Oh well, let's meet later in the year, not early next year.
I had a bit of a rough year last time, so I'm just getting back on my feet there. I can invite you for lunch, or if you want to, all the other chaps as well, or, just to run through it. I'll provide a suggested guide, and I might explain what the feedback was and how this slightly changed from it worked, and make it a bit easier on you. So I recognise that. So fantastic. You guys sound like you've got some really interesting stuff going on too. So
that wasn't a real development application, was it?
No.
I lived in the area and I was like, well, it is, I don't know, it's
I know someone who's got their eye on that area.
2 years ago we had the site on Park Street in Sydney Road.
Yeah.
And we had pretty much a similar scenario. And it actually all got rezoned.
Yes,
so we can use
some of the photos and
I don't
you
think
can
you're
see
putting
there's
everything
land
out to
banks
waste.
to
But you might want to remind yourself of
I didn't
some
think
of
a
the
developer would be that lucky to buy that many
hello,
adjoining
and you are
lots.
Charlotte. So
Very close.
yeah, look, if you wanted to pursue, it feels weird standing here looking down on people. There we are. If you wanted to pursue that, I'll be happy to supervise a PhD, a thesis. Too early for a PhD. Or independent study or something like that, because I don't know much about it. No one does. So Andrew said he got a bunch of calls and he didn't know. So it's an interesting area. I really wonder how that type of provision in its various forms around the world, or even just around Australia, is used or not used, because it's a sort of another layer of politics and populist sentiment and politicking and scheming. Some of those things are good and sometimes they're bad. So
they vary. So some are discretionary, some are
I'm
mandatory.
sure that's quite good.
Yeah, so it varies just according to what the minister approves in the end.
But if you look at
So this one is discretionary. Many are mandatory.
revoking amendments it happened within
It will say a permit cannot be granted to vary this
because it's
requirement.
the
Okay?
floodgates.
It's actually
A lot of
quite
things to be
difficult
criticised.
to pick up.
State government,
There you go.
so you can think of local governments doing standing orders of appeals, and then state government, and what role does the state government? What are they meant to have? Is it potentially something that could get bigger and bigger, or is it quite limited? I mean, the section of the Act seems to be in there to limit, increase and as a last check. But whether or not that's really how it was used in that last case is a pretty interesting question. Yeah.
There you go, I put it right up there.
Oh, thank you.
Fair and equitable distribution of the functions.
You can have the other one.
You have more of the other one.
I do, yeah.
You'll have to go through the list, halal, lactose intolerance, celeriacs, there's a whole range of questions. Okay. Have a think, yeah. Oh, you have a different format, yeah. I'll see what you think, yeah, okay, great. Oh, good to have the urban designers in with us, actually. How many are you? Are you this year's intake? Or?
I'm on his intake, and I think there were
Good luck.
Yeah.
maybe this year about 20, but still
That's
quite
good.
a small
Yeah,
number.
it's remained small. Yeah.
Yeah.
Still really important area. It's sort of the under acknowledged sort of disciplinary area.
Yeah.
Plenty of jobs out there. You'll be fine. No, seriously, it's
Yeah,
good.
I know.
It's good. Yeah. Our degree is good in that you sort of do some of the stat stuff, so you're ready to go once
So
you
you've
get
got,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
something
right.
for
So you're
everything. Yeah,
planning
it's very
urban
good.
design crossover. I started an urban design sort of degree at RMIT back in 2004, and this is when I sort of started out as a lecturer, and so I sort of knew all the students. It's a bit hard nowadays to keep up with everyone, but I'm sort of in touch with a lot of them. They've got into great jobs. Some of them are directors now.
And it's
Over that time period.
Choose what you want to do. There's so many options.
Exactly, work to your strengths and interests, and and you can make a bit of money out of it if you go down that path. It sort of helps, doesn't it? I always say, do something that can make a bit of money. Don't be afraid of it. Yeah. Great, no worries. Cheers.
Just a question regarding the discussion board. Just wondering.
Oh, I haven't been checking that. Yeah, I travelled a bit last week. I went up to Canberra and presented stuff. Is there much there?
I think there's 6 groups.
All right. Okay, I better just wade through it. Yeah, it won't be tonight. I'm meeting with the tutors after this to sort of moderate things and whatnot. But yeah, good point. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank
no
you.
worries. Okay, get my stuff. Andrew's off, is he? I was going to offer him a drink. Oh.
Yeah, I was thinking I can take it back in a bit of time.
Did you make a profit, you guys, out of that?
I think so.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Yeah. I mean, it's great. You guys did that. It's always a little bit of extra work at a busy time doing that, isn't it? So,